Hi, I'm Donna Davis here with Live Streaming Basics, and I am joined by Thomas Wallace, an expert in live streaming. We are both here to answer all of your live streaming questions today. So, welcome to the show. And, Thomas, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Donna, and welcome to everyone out there watching online.
Yeah, so this is a great time to be talking about live streaming. Thomas and I both have been doing live streaming for years. We come to it with a different background, but we've both been doing this for a long time. So we wanted to just be able to share some knowledge, but it seems very timely with the coronavirus that a lot of people are asking the question, how do I take my event online, because so many events have been canceled. So we hope we can help you out with that today. Just a quick rundown of all the things that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to go over the gear that's needed, basics of planning your event. We'll show you examples of live streaming. Or live streaming videos that have been live streamed. We'll try to give you some ideas. Then we'll go over just a little bit about the cost and the type of equipment and the hardware and that kind of thing that you'll need, some of the options for you, how simple it can be, and how complex it can be. So live streaming takes in a lot. So first of all, we want to tell you a little bit about ourselves. So I'm going to pitch it out to Thomas to tell you about his background. Very impressive, knows just about anything you need to know in live streaming. Thomas?
Thanks, Donna. So my name's Thomas Wallace. I recently actually moved back to Georgia, where I'm based now in the Atlanta area from New York. I spent the last 12 years in New York working in production in various different roles. And during my time there, I spent 5 years as senior producer for live streams. So some of you may know of the live streaming platform called Live Streaming. They actually recently were acquired by Vimeo. But while I was there, basically they decided that they wanted to create this internal production team to help serve the platform clients, because a lot of the platform clients realized that they needed help with production. So I was one of the first hires on that production team. And during my time there, I produced hundreds of live streams of varying complexity, from basic single camera setups all the way up to big multi-camera broadcast style shows. And one of the great things about being there was just the range of experience that I got to have working in a variety of different roles in live. So on some projects, I was the producer, I was the tech manager, the director, the technical director, all the way down to even just operating camera and getting an understanding of really what, operating a camera for live means versus doing it for narrative or commercial production, because those things are very different. And one of the other really cool things that I got to be a part of while I was there at Livestream was developing a switching software. So some of you may know of the Livestream Studio software. I believe now it's called Vimeo Studio, but it's a live streaming, a software-based switching software that as part of the production team, we helped the developers kind of, come up with all of the features, and we really approached it from a very practical production standpoint of, what is it that you need? So I really got to be a part of that whole development process, and that was really exciting. So I just wanted to share a couple of examples of some shows that I worked on over the years. I just have 3 shows to share with you here, and these are kind of some of the more exciting, clients that we worked with. So the first example that we have here is a fashion show, and being in New York, we did a lot of work with New York Fashion Week. So we'd partner with various different designers to stream their fashion shows live from the red carpet. And this one that you're seeing now is from Carolina Herrera, and we did this show for years. And I believe they still work with Carolina Herrera on this show. She's stuck with the live stream production team. But this is a great look at fashion. Fashion is one of those things in terms of live production that's pretty formulaic. You have that classic 2-camera look coming down the runway where you do the head to toe wide shot and then you have the tighter shot that tilts up from the feet to reveal kind of the entire outfit and show the model as they make their turn at the end of the runway. And in this one, we also incorporated a couple of lipstick cameras, which are kind of small remote cameras that we mount around the venue. You can see that in the opening shot there. That just kind of give you some variety and something different to cut to other than just those two main shots. So those are a great example of some fashion stuff. The next one I want to share with you here is a concert, and this is Slash live at Irving Plaza in Union Square. And this is a great example of a music show. Music is one of those really exciting and dynamic live style shows to do, just because, you know, there's a lot more creativity to it than some of the other more formulaic shows. And in this one, we had 5 cameras. You can see we've got the kind of classic, you know, wide shot at the center of the stage looking up. We've got a downstage camera that's in the pit on a 50 millimeter prime looking up at Slash and getting those nice shots of his guitar and all that. And then we also incorporated a lipstick camera on the drummer, which you may see in the cut here. Another great way to, you know, put kind of a static mounted camera there to just give you a little bit of a more dynamic feel. So that's a great example of a music show. And then the last one that I want to share with you here is from the New Year's Eve in Times Square broadcast, or webcast, I should say. This one is an example of a really, really big and impressive stream. This is actually the official New Year's Eve Times Square live stream. And this show is really unique because it's really, this webcast that we produce is tied into a much larger broadcast production. So out there in Times Square, all of the big broadcasters, Fox and NBC and ABC, everyone's got their own stage and everyone's got kind of their own broadcast infrastructure to produce their shows with their hosts and with their guests. But in addition to that, there's a kind of an entire broadcast infrastructure that's built as what they call a pool feed, where there are 20 plus cameras stationed all around Times Square that all of the broadcasters get to use those feeds to cut shots of Times Square, and, you know, the big jib shots showing the big crowds and the shot showing the Times Square ball there at the top. And that's something that we got to incorporate as well. So in the webcast, we'd have these 20 plus broadcast cameras. And then in addition to that, we would have our own host position where we would do interviews with people. And then we would also have roaming crews who would run out and do interviews with the revelers, the people who are actually there just to experience the event. And we would bring those interviews back into our truck and roll them into the broadcast throughout the night. So that's a really exciting one. And that was a really great show to work on for me. I worked on it for, I believe, 6 or 8 years, something like that. And I really got to be in all different roles, from directing the show to producing to technical directing to being a field producer, you know, getting those interviews out with the revelers. So really a great one where I got a lot of different experience with a lot of moving pieces. So that's kind of it for my background. And Donna, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, and I think our backgrounds are so great for being complementary. Thomas, as you can see, has all the technical expertise, and I was thrilled to get connected with Thomas because he brings to Atlanta a depth of technical expertise that I haven't seen yet, and I love that he can cover just anything, and he has all that experience. My background is very different. I come from a news background. I worked in news for about 20 years, and what I like about that is that I'm used to going live, both being in front of the camera and behind the camera. I know how powerful live can be, and I actually do believe that every brand will have their own online television show, and it's so great because you can now interact with your audience. You couldn't do that when I was in news years ago, but like I said, my background is in television news, and we saw the power of live streaming and how much or not live streaming, of just going live. In fact, in the 80s, everybody went live just for the sake of it because people actually watched so much longer. And that's the reason why live is so powerful today on platforms like Facebook, live gets priority in the news feed. People watch it 4 times longer. People actually love that they can interact, and they actually love that things can go wrong. And that's one reason that people love to watch live. So I wanted to, show you a couple of pictures from my news career, if we can see those. So you can see I go way back, but this was the time that television news started going live all the time. So I'm very familiar with how powerful live is, how important it is, and I have that experience with producing live shows. So I think our skill set is really great, and I help clients work with all of their stakeholders and that kind of thing, like how can we make this better for your sponsors, for the organization, how do we tell your brand story during the live, and how do we help you get more out of it when it's over. So the organization, the attendees on the live, and the sponsors, 3 great stakeholders that I always help clients, how do we make the most for them and make the most of your event. And then so what we do now is we'll go out on different lives, both remote and here in the studio, just like we're doing today. So among our clients, we did a panel discussion for Harvard University. And you'll see, Thomas will talk a little bit later about the difference in, microphones. How many microphones do you need? Sounds a little more challenging than video. And so on this live stream, we had 6 open mics. And so you have to be able to control all of those mics. The camera is actually pretty easy, but this looks really basic after you've seen the ball drop and those kind of things. But these are important, these panel discussions with internal communications. We have a lot of clients that do that. So this is where we take all the equipment out to you, and I call it television in a box. And then we also do in studio, just like we're doing today, but there are various clients that we'll take in studio. This is an example, a real estate client of ours. In fact, she used to work in television news as well, so she knows how to produce her shows. She's talking with a couple of her millennial clients and talking about, their needs in real estate. And so we put together what looks like a mini television show where people can interact and ask questions. I do want to bring up there, we do want to take your questions. That's going to be later in the show, and you can either use the chat box. You just scroll down a little bit to use the chat box, but you do have to sign into YouTube with your Google account in order to chat there. Or you can simply email your questions to Donna@provideotalent.com. So we do want to get your questions asked. And then, so Thomas is going to talk about what it takes to get started with live streaming. So Thomas, you can take it from here.
Great. So yeah, when I think about live streaming workflows, I really always like to break things down into 4 main categories. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about each one of these, but just to give you the overview. The first category that I always think about is audio and audio sources. So how do we bring audio, microphones, music, all that kind of stuff into our broadcasts? The second is video sources, which can include cameras or presentation feeds or, video roll-ins, maybe stuff like that. The third is Video Village, I call it, which can encompass a lot of things. At its most base level, that's going to include an encoder, which is the device that's going to take your video feed and actually send it up to, the web so that viewers can watch it. But other things can be included there. And then the fourth one is the live streaming platform, which is where your viewers will actually go to watch the stream, or maybe you're embedding a player somewhere else, but you still need a platform in order to stream. So just to speak about each one of those in a little bit more detail, the first I mentioned was audio. And, a lot of people don't necessarily think about audio as much as they need to, but for me, and I'm someone who comes from a video background. I'm a DP. I kind of have, a lot of care for the image, but I actually think that audio is far more important than the image is. And you can kind of think about it in terms of, if you were going to watch a movie, let's say, and you turn the movie on your TV and you go to the channel and the picture's not so great. It's a little bit grainy, maybe there's a little bit of interference, but the audio sounds great. You can sit and watch that movie, but in the flip side of that, if you tune in and the picture looks great and it's pristine HD and all that, but the audio is coming in and out and it's crackly and there's interference, you're just not going to sit and watch that. So I really always try to put a lot of emphasis on making sure that audio is really great. And, you really need to think about things like how many speakers do you have, which is going to inform how many microphones you need. When you get into more complex workflows, you really want to make sure that you're including a sword and a sound operator so that you can control the levels of individual mics and all that kind of stuff. So audio is super important, and there's a lot that you can do with it. The second category that I mentioned was cameras or video sources. So, that can be anything from a camera, multiple cameras. We always like to do our live streams with multiple cameras because it just adds this level of production value. It makes things much more dynamic, and it allows you to show much more. But in addition to that, you can think about things like a presentation feed, for example. So if you have a town hall, or even just, you're doing a presentation at a conference, typically people will have a PowerPoint presentation or maybe videos that they're showing to the audience in the room. So you want to make sure that you can show that stuff on your stream as well. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that depending on what kind of video switcher you're using. You can sometimes send those sources in over the network, or you can plug a laptop directly into your switcher and do a screen share. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. But the video sources are obviously very important because you do want to have something to show your viewers in terms of visuals as well. Now, the third category that I mentioned was Video Village, which can kind of include a lot of things, but it doesn't need to be so complex, but it can get very complex when you get into more complex requirements and bigger shows. So the major things that I always think about with Video Village is your video switcher, if you need one. If you only have one camera, then maybe you don't need a video switcher, but most of the time we're using a switcher where we can bring multiple camera sources in, as well as include graphics, video roll-ins. We can include those presentation feeds if we're using those. So that's the video switcher. And with switchers, you really have two different kinds of things. You have what we call hardware-based switchers and software-based switchers. I won't get into talking about those because we can talk forever, but just know that typically when you use software-based switchers, which is a switcher that runs on a computer, you get a lot more functionality. You can do things like roll videos in, do graphics, and a lot of times you'll have encoding built right into the machine. So the encoder was something I mentioned that would be kind of the bare bones of your Video Village setup, because anytime you're live streaming, you need an encoder to send a stream out to the internet. So you can have a standalone encoder, or you can have that as, built into your video switcher. Also at Video Village, we'll have recording. If we're recording, ISO feeds of the cameras, or maybe we're recording a line cut of what we're streaming out to the world, just as a backup in case the stream doesn't work for some reason, which happens often. You want to make sure you're recording there so that if the stream doesn't go out, at least you have the recording of the show and you can upload it later so people can still watch it. And then there's a lot of other things that may be included, like comms, video distribution, but those are really things that when we get into more complex workflows, you'll see. Now, the last section that I mentioned was live streaming platform. And along with this, I like to mention you always need an internet connection for streaming. Goes without saying, but it's something that people sometimes take for granted and don't think about. And one of the things that I always urge people when you're doing live streaming is to make sure that you use a wired connection, which means you're actually going to get an Ethernet cable and you're going to plug your computer or your encoder, whatever it is, you're going to plug that Ethernet connection in so that we're not relying on Wi-Fi. We're not relying on a router. Basically, you just want to make sure that you're hardlined so that you can guarantee at least you remove one fail point from the equation. My workflows are always about removing fail points and building redundancy, making sure if something breaks, it can be fixed. So as far as live streaming platforms go, there's a lot of different options out there. There's tons of platforms these days. When I started, there were not so many platforms, but nowadays I couldn't even list them all for you because there's so many platforms, but some of the common ones you've obviously heard of. Today we're using YouTube Live, so that's one. Facebook Live. You can go live on Instagram. But then there are some more kind of higher end options like Wowza, Brightcove, Livestream, and Vimeo are two great options. And then you have some more niche ones, something like Twitch, if you imagine, that's for gaming. So you do have some of those more niche platforms. And when you're looking for a platform, you really just need to consider your needs because there's a lot of different functionality. Maybe security is a big issue for you, so you want to make sure you have a highly secure platform. Maybe you want a player that you can white label. You want to remove the branding from the player and maybe put your own brand on there so that people don't see YouTube or Facebook when they come to watch. Maybe you want to make sure you have functionality for VOD or for cloud encoding where you can have multiple qualities so that if someone connects with a bad internet connection, they can watch stream. So there's a lot of different things to consider with platforms, and kind of like, Donna mentioned, you really just want to list out the things that are important to you and then figure it out from there. So later on, we're going to do some more streams to go more in depth about each one of these categories, where I'll kind of give you some recommendations for cameras, for audio, for video switchers, and for platforms, but that's a little bit too deep for us to get into with this basic discussion here. So in terms of getting started, those are the things you need. And the most basic way for anyone to get started is just to use the thing that everyone has, which is your cell phone. And if you think about your cell phone, it's actually got all of those things that I mentioned built right in. You've got a microphone to capture audio. You've got a camera to capture video. You've got an encoder. Typically, that would be an app of some kind, Facebook Live or YouTube Live or Livestream. All of these platforms have apps that you can use to stream. So that's going to be your encoder. And then, of course, you have your internet connection, whether that's Wi-Fi or whether you're streaming via the network. Now, we wanted to share with you a couple of basic two workflows. One of them is basic and one of them is a little bit more complex to show you kind of how these things can be applied in a practical setup. So the first one we're going to show you here is just a very simple workflow diagram. These workflow diagrams are something that I create for any job that I do, and I'll print these off and pass them around to the crew so that everybody understands not just how their little piece of the pie is working, but how everything works together, and just so that people can kind of get the holistic view. So in this first workflow here, what you're looking at is just a very simple 2-camera setup. We're not doing anything fancy. And in terms of audio, this is a very stripped down setup where we've actually removed the need for an audio board completely by just running microphones right into the cameras. And then you can send your embedded audio, the microphones, via HDMI or SDI into your video switcher, and then from there, encode up to the web. So that's a look at just a really basic, simple 2-camera setup that, doesn't take a whole lot to get going. And then I have a more complex workflow that I wanted to share with you guys here. This is from a show that I worked on in New York in 2018. This was a product launch for DJI, the company you guys are maybe familiar with. They make drones and gimbals, but this was a show for a release of one of their newest drones. So you can see this is much more complex, and this is, the stakes are much higher in a show like this. So we have 7 cameras here. We've got a presentation feed, the keynote feed you see on the left here. All of this is hitting a distribution center, which is it's a video hub. Blackmagic makes a video hub, but it's basically just a device that lets you plug in inputs, and then you can take different outputs and you can assign whatever inputs you want to different outputs. In this case, we actually have a primary and a backup video switcher, and that's something that I do standard in all of my work because you just never know in live streaming. And oftentimes, if you're running a software switcher, for example, computers just crash. Computers just have issues, and there's absolutely nothing you can do sometimes. So in this workflow, we have a primary and a backup video switcher. We also have a separate video switcher here that's just running IMAG, which refers to screens around the venue where the feed is displayed. And then there's a lot of different requirements here with recording and streaming and all that kind of stuff. So this is just to show you, not to overwhelm you, but just to show you how these setups can go from something very simple to something very complex pretty quickly. So those are kind of two ends of the spectrum. And that's kind of a great transition to talk about cost, because as you can see with these workflows, similarly to how the complexity of a show can really go from 0 to 100, the same thing applies for cost. So as I mentioned, the easiest way to get started is with a cell phone. Most people already have a cell phone, and if you use a platform like YouTube or Facebook that doesn't charge anything for live streaming, you can go live for free today. And Donna and I both feel, if live streaming is something you want to get into, it's best to just get started however you can. You don't always have to spend a huge amount of money to get started. Obviously, for some organizations, you have to start with a certain level of quality, so you can't just go live from your phone, but that is always an option. But so costs can vary greatly. Donna and I did put some numbers together, and just to give you an idea, a basic in-studio shoot like the one we're doing right now, because we have everything already set up, all the gear's already there, we offer a basic live streaming studio shoot like this for about $1,500. Again, that can vary a little bit depending on if you have special requirements, if we need to bring in additional crew or additional gear, but around $1,500 is what you can expect to pay for an in-studio live stream like this. Once we get into going out into the field and bringing gear out to your location and setting up for a live stream, in your space, you're looking at about $6,500 to start. And of course, the costs just go up from there depending on different requirements. Obviously, as we add more gear, we need more crew, so we got to pay the crew and all that kind of stuff. So if you do have any special requirements, you can feel free to ask. We're happy to put together numbers for you for, what it would cost to incorporate special requests. But that's kind of a basic starting point for a stream out in the field. So now I'm going to toss it back to Donna, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about planning your event and some of the common questions that we hear from clients and kind of some of the common questions that we ask in order to make sure that we're giving clients what they need.
Thanks, Thomas. That was very informative. So as you can see, there's huge differences with live streaming. And some people ask me, well, what's the difference in what you do and going live on a phone? And I think you see there's basically a television quality to a broadcast that you put together, even if it's something simple like a studio. And I do want to mention that we were planning to have Thomas in the studio today. Well, it turned out with the coronavirus, he did not want to come to the studio, which is great. And that is the situation with so many people. So a lot of people are using Skype. So if you do see that every once in a while the Skype picture kind of stops or is not ideal, that's just what you deal with when you use Skype. But of course, news organizations, all of us are using Skype. You can still get a really nice picture, and you do get, a nice, informative. I was so glad that Thomas was able to join us. So just wanted to mention that about Skype. I want to talk to you really quickly. We're going to get to questions in just a minute, but I wanted to, and we do have a great question that we'll get to. I want to talk to you a little bit about DIY versus professional. Of course, the DIY, that's the lowest level, just like Thomas said, is to use your cell phone. But if you wanted to do a live stream, invest in your own equipment, invest in your own people. A couple of things to think about with that is that if you're going live all the time, and you feel like you're going to need to go live really on a consistent basis and you feel like you can save money, it's a good idea to talk and consult with somebody like Thomas to see what would I need to spend to get started to reach my goals when you think about your goals. And you do need a team that does this consistently. There are a lot of changes. You really have to get used to it. Even teams that do full production video, a lot of times within a company, they don't want to do live streams. They can be stressful. You do need to do them all the time because these platforms that you use can also change. So you need to stay abreast. You need to be able to use a team. And then you can even do a hybrid. You could invest in some equipment and a studio and have that set up and then bring in a crew. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, but it's always a good idea. Thomas and I do consulting, and we can work with people all over the country. So just know that before you start to think about making a huge investment, and some people buy the wrong cameras or buy things that don't work to meet their needs, it is a good idea to talk to somebody first and at least get a handle on what those costs are so you can look at it yourself. So I do want to show the planning graphic one more time. When you start to think about a live stream, you do want to think about your goals for this live stream. What is the end goal for that live stream? Is it to educate your audience? Is it to give your sponsors a greater value, as people are looking at now taking their events from in person to online? A lot of people are thinking, especially with nonprofits, we had this huge gala and maybe it's the biggest fundraiser of the year and now we can't have it and now we're going to miss out on all that. So I'm a big believer and felt like even before all this happened that you should both go have your event and take it online at the same time. Some people say, oh gosh, no one will show up if they could watch online. Totally not true. We've seen over and over and over again with our clients that there's more excitement. People want to see the video as soon as people who attended want to see the video the next day. Your sponsors get so much more value because it's a huge audience that's seeing that. And then the participants watch it over and over again. Takes nothing away but builds a lot. But now that you're in this situation where you can't have the gala, you really want to think about taking this online. So you want to think about all your goals. Is your goal to bring everybody together online? Do you want to share information? Do you want a certain number of attendees? Do you want to create excitement? How do you give your sponsors, your attendees, and your organization the most that you can get from a live stream, both on the night, the promotion leading up to it, and then when it's over, the impact that you can make with the video and maybe editing those videos into small pieces like you would do for an award ceremony. So I do want to show a video. We did not actually do this, but I heard from a colleague of mine that a lot of people are going to these online auctions. And instead of just skipping the gala altogether, they are putting it out online, which is a great idea and goes to a question that we have from a nonprofit that's asking, how do we do this sort of thing? So here, of course, they could bring in their logo the entire time. That's easy to do with the software, just like Thomas mentioned. So they're asking people to enter their bids on this online auction. And you can see how the enthusiasm and excitement of the guest and the recognition that they can give people, and everybody was alive on that online chat on YouTube, and so they were taking part in it. And there's no webinar that can mimic what they do. So I think that this is a great idea to take your nonprofit events online. You could even do, I talked to an animal charity and I said, why not have a vet come on and answer people's questions? Maybe you have maybe you don't want a shelter dog, you can't, but you have tons of questions. And then you say, hey, can you appreciate the fact that we had a vet here for, half an hour to answer your questions? Make a donation. So there's a lot of different ideas that you can do to incorporate online giving to recognize people who won awards that maybe you can't have that award ceremony. We had a contact from a keynote speaker who said, they're going to cancel my event and some people are doing webinars, but I'd rather be able to engage with people and present on camera. And so I think there's so many applications for live streaming. I do want people here listening to this today to think about this. Probably every brand at some point will have their own online show, almost like a television show. Are you going to be ahead of that or just behind it? So it will happen. There's no doubt. There's so much power in live streaming. So yeah, we got the question, how to create a look for a client like nonprofits who may have a logo and videos they want to incorporate. Easy to do. You've seen today, we're able to bring in our names, our visuals, images, text, videos as you talk. I mean, you can bring in anything just like you can when you watch television news. So think of it just like television online. Really no difference. So we have an intern here helping out. Megan, do we have any other questions?
I do not see any other questions.
Okay, so you can also email me. And Alex, if we can show my email on the screen, so it may make it a little bit easier. You can email donna@provideotalent.com. If you don't want to sign into the chat, we'll take your questions. And now is the time to go ahead and email any questions that you have. If you have something that you want to email us about later, certainly we can answer those questions. We also want to let you know we will keep this video on the same web page. We'll update it so you're not having to see the graphic at the beginning. So we'll update the video, put it out so that you can experience it again on this web page. We also have a live streaming guide that's sort of how do you plan your event for live streaming. You can download that on this page as well. So Thomas, do you have any closing remarks? I don't see any questions here.
Well,
so.
just to elaborate a little bit on the question, how to incorporate this stuff. It's easy to say that it's, not too difficult, but just to give you a little bit more practical recommendations, the software that we're using here to produce this show is called Wirecast. So you can take a look at Wirecast. They're kind of the lower end of, these software-based switching solutions. And I believe they actually offer a free trial. So you can download it, you can import all the assets like Donna's talking about. Typically, they actually have a bunch of kind of pre-built things in here that you can use. So they have templates where you can create lower thirds and all that kind of stuff. But you can also, if you have a design team or maybe the brand already has some of this stuff, you can actually create assets in Photoshop or in another program and bring things in like a PNG with transparency in order to be able to do lower thirds like this. So Wirecast is a really great solution to look at if you just want to get started with no cost. And as I mentioned before, when I was talking about Video Village, it's got the encoder built right in. So you just type in your YouTube credentials or your Facebook credentials or whatever platform it is you want to use. Of course, they don't integrate with every platform out there, but they have a lot of integrations. So you can just type in your credentials and go live right from Wirecast. You can use Wirecast to bring video sources in. You can roll pre-made video packages in, and you also have some basic audio controls. So it's a great way to start producing a show like this just pretty easily with no cost in the beginning, especially if you just want to get a feel for it. And then if you want to look at some more advanced options, as I mentioned before, helped develop the Livestream Studio software. I believe it's called Vimeo Studio now, but if you just Google Livestream Studio software, you'll find that. That's another really great one. For me personally, I think Wirecast is not the most user-friendly. It's a little bit complicated. I think Livestream Studio is much more user-friendly. If you've ever used an NLE, Premiere, or Final Cut Pro or anything like that, it's a really simple and intuitive software that's very deep and has a lot of functionality. So you can check that out. And then the third one that I like to always mention is called vMix. You can search that online as well, VMIX. That's another really great one. Little bit more complex, not as user-friendly, but very deep. It has a ton of integrations, ton of functionality. So that's another really great one. And I believe all of these have free demos. So you can download the software, you can look at it and play around with it and get a feel for it.
And the real reason to go live is how can your audience interact with you? So I would say the simplest way to get your audience to interact with you is to go live on Facebook. We were deliberate in not going live on Facebook today. We are going to do some lives on Facebook, but today we really wanted to put this on a web page and go live from a web page. But we could go live on Facebook. We will go live on Facebook. And so it's interesting. In 2008, my company started live streaming. The technology's been around for a long time. I mean, when you think about that, that's 12 years ago, and it's still not widely used. But the technology was there. We helped an association literally go from about 15 members that showed up to their event to an association with about 2,000 members. They did their CEUs online. And so at that point, if you already had an audience that could interact, so they had the event audience that was there, then they had people who, we put a chat box. We embedded a chat box because YouTube didn't have one back then. So we would go live and they would ask questions via the chat box. So that's one way, and people can, write in and ask their questions just like you guys are doing right now. Because sometimes people don't want to sign into something like YouTube and that kind of thing. So that's one way that you can, bring people in and have them interact. But when Facebook came out with, I'll never forget the day. I'm sitting watching the news, CBS this morning, and Facebook, they mentioned Facebook lets you go live now. And I thought, this is a game changer because people are already on Facebook. They know how to use it. There's no, hey, how do I use that chat box? What do you mean I have to sign in? So everything with the interaction was built right in. So perfect for an award ceremony, for a charity fundraiser, anytime that you don't want to you just want to put it out there. And even we were supposed to do a wedding where they had a closed Facebook page and people have to pay they made a donation to the couple for their wedding, and that was the only way they got access is in that Facebook page. So, but they still have all the interaction. So the audience can ask questions, interact, make comments to say like, congratulations on that award, or I'm going to donate $100. And then so somebody donates $100, and just like you saw on the nonprofit video with the gala, they were able to immediately see that, hey, Janie gave $10,000. Let's put her name out on the screen. So it's such real-time interaction, and that is really the reason to go live, is for that interaction. So that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So we just got a question from one of my friends in the Video Association group. So I'm just going to read this. I haven't read it, so if I make a mistake. In an era of social distancing, how do video pros pitch this idea to clients? Clients won't come to the studio, and video crews should not go to them either. How can you do more than Facebook Live or YouTube Live? Well, I think today is an example of how we did that. Like, Thomas didn't want to come to the studio, reasonably so, and so we wanted to set it up just like this. And so the people that I work with, Alex, who is there doing the switching, we're still working through this. And so we are doing the social distancing. He's far away from me, so we can still go live, but he's asking, how can you do this beyond Facebook or YouTube? And like Thomas mentioned, there's so many other things that you can do, but I think the simplest thing, bring somebody in via Skype. And Thomas, I'll let you answer some of that. And Don, who asked the question, is a video pro, so I know he does a lot of really fantastic videos, so.
Yeah, so obviously Skype is a great option. We're using Skype today, and I'm actually using my Red camera to send my picture, so it probably looks a little bit better than a webcam would. But you can do sorry about that. Yeah, you can do a lot more. Kind of if Skype is not high enough quality for you, and you need to incorporate higher quality. Obviously, there's a bit of a cost involved, but you do like sending the people who need to be a part of your live stream a camera package with an encoder, and you can do that in a way where everything is pre-configured and they pretty much just have to plug things in. One of the things that a lot of these software-based switchers incorporate is where you can pull in virtual sources. So a virtual source could be a camera that's on the local network, or a cell phone that's connected to the local network, but it can also be a remote camera that's sending an RTMP stream to a server somewhere, and then you can pull that in. So similar to the way that news organizations will go out in the field and have a remote team, and then in their broadcast center they'll pull that feed in, and the anchors can talk to each other. you can incorporate that kind of thing and make it a higher quality than just Skype. So if you have some more specific questions around that and you want some more advice on exactly how to go about that and what gear is good for that, feel free to email us and I'll be happy to give you some more in-depth recommendations.
So this is really, thank you, Thomas, for that answer. This is really helpful. Somebody sent in a chat and said that my link didn't work to the live streaming guide. I will get that fixed. We'll get this video up and I will fix that link. And thank you for letting me know. So we'll get that done. We also had this question, and Thomas, listen in on this one because you may be able to answer this better than I can. Thomas is much more technical than I am. So she says, or he says, I'm not sure. How would we integrate this at a medical conference where we have a main room, exhibit room, and then break off sessions? So what I'll say about this is that one of the things you want to consider is you talk about the break off sessions and that kind of thing. So if you want to live stream, you really, if you have 4 or 5 sessions going on at the same time, you really need that many crews. Each one of them can be in, going live at the same time, different links, of course, and you can put them all those onto, like, say, a web page so it's not confusing. But say if you wanted to watch what's in breakout room 1, you have a video crew in there. They could all day long put those links out for people to be able to watch who are online. Also, if you have a main feed, and Thomas needs your help on this a little bit, I would think as long as you have a long enough cable that you can broadcast that, or you could even take that out to YouTube if you wanted people in different rooms to be able to watch what's going on in that main conference room, that there's a lot of different ways that, they could do that. Like all they have to do is pull up the YouTube link onto a large monitor. And so if they're in different rooms, but they want to see what's going on in the main room, you can certainly do that. So I don't know if I answered your question. And Thomas, I'll let you speak to this too. Did you get the question?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, you're right, Donna. You definitely need, obviously, people covering different things. If you're trying to keep costs down within that, you can think about things like, what are the most important sessions to actually be live? So obviously, as Donna mentioned, you can have a different player for each location at your conference, and you can have a team streaming from each room. And I've done setups like that. But I've also done setups where we'll kind of build a master control, what we would call a master control. And then, as long as things are not happening simultaneously, you can have the master control do everything, all the switching and all of that. But you obviously still need to have camera guys manning the cameras in each room. So there are ways to, make it more cost effective. And the other thing to think about is, how important are those breakout sessions? If you have the keynote stage and that's a huge priority and you want to make sure people can see the keynote and that stage is live all the time, then, you can just make that live all the time. And then you can have crews just filming in the other rooms. And then you can even, if you have the infrastructure for it, you can do a quick edit and you can bring those other presentations into your stream as video playback. So they're not necessarily live, but, maybe you have breaks in the keynote presentation. So the keynote, has a break from noon to 1 p.m. And then you're able to ingest one of those previous sessions from another room and play that out on the main feed. So that's a way to make it more cost effective where you can, just have that one main crew, because it does obviously get more expensive when you start adding more video switchers and more technical directors and all that kind of stuff.
And that's such a good point, because some people who don't want to take the leap, I guess, of going live, what they'll do is just to have like a video crew and a live streaming crew, and just one of the video crew will go out to each one of these things so that at least you're creating that sense of excitement. So say you had a keynote speaker and then you had that video crew shoot that, and then you just take it to the person who's there at the live streaming computer and they just put it out live on, say, Facebook. So, and maybe they edit together little things from your conference and you're not actually having to you have each one of these pre-tape pieces go out live. And so that is one way to kind of create excitement. And you're right, that there's so many different ways to look at this, and depending on exactly what your needs are. Obviously, if you wanted these for CEUs or that sort of thing, you wanted to be able to take the whole presentation, that's how you do it. But there's so many different ways. Great point, Thomas, that these video crews, that's another thing. The wedding that we had scheduled to shoot this Sunday, we were going to have a video crew there because she asked, the bride asked, well, can we, walk around with these cameras? I like to use cables. The cameras are, set with the cable. And so I don't want my cameras running around. But the predator, like they call it, the producer editor, we had a crew who was just dedicated to, they would go around and show people, and they could be loose and not wired, and then they edit right there and then hand it to the director, and we put that out to make the wedding more exciting and bring a little more action to it. So I think those are great points, and a good live streaming company will always consult with you on what are your goals, and sometimes I'll work backwards with people. Tell me what your budget is, and I'll tell you what we can do for that. One thing that I do want to mention about the conference is it seemed like a lot of conference centers were going to just wireless connections. And one of the things that all of us in the live streaming business do is go to the site, test that wired connection, and if there's not a wired connection, I won't go live. And because you're just risking too much. You spend all this money, and you may or may not, you may have problems with the wireless. And you can speak to that, Thomas. This is more your area of expertise, but I always go to the site, make sure that the upload speeds are great enough. So yeah, that's a great point for you to speak to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will do anything. If the only thing available is wireless, I'll do it. It's certainly not recommended, and I don't like it. But in that scenario, I am always very upfront with my clients because, as with anything in live streaming, unless you really build redundancy into your workflows, which means maybe backup internet sources, maybe backup transmission plans, maybe a backup video switcher, things happen, things go down. So it's possible to stream from Wi-Fi. It's certainly not recommended, but for me, as long as the client understands, hey, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that things work, but sometimes things are just out of our hands, and Wi-Fi is one of those red flags that I'll throw up and say, we can do this if you want, but it's really not recommended. But if it's the only option and you're willing to take on that risk, then I'm happy to do it. But, Donna, I haven't seen, and I haven't worked at many event centers here in Atlanta just yet, but typically these event centers, conference centers, hotel ballrooms, all of these places have IT staff. And if you ask the right questions and you push hard enough, and if our clients, the people who are hiring us for their events, are on board, and they're paying all this money to rent the space, then typically the IT departments will work with us, and they will give us a wired connection, and they will help us try to make sure that we have dedicated internet or whatever it is that we need to make sure that it's going to go as well as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if the worst thing that happens is that your live broadcast doesn't look so good, or they're stuttering or drop frames or whatever it is, you still have an edited event because of the equipment that you're bringing and that sort of thing. So you have a great quality. Most of us, I think, who live stream always record it internally. So even if there's something wrong with it, a lot of times your file that you'll have as soon as the event is done is still perfect, and you can put that out. So all is not lost. But if you're counting on a great live stream, I just always like to have a wired connection. But I know 5G is probably coming out soon, and maybe that's great. But it's just something to think about. Like you said, if you can live with it, that if something went wrong, and even Skype, we're depending on, the Skype connection. And so far it's been fine, but you just never know when you have to depend on that.
And the other thing on that front, which a lot of people don't, if you don't really know about live streaming, all of these encoders, I mentioned the idea of an encoder that takes your video and pushes it up to the internet. all of these encoders will typically have controls where you can look at your internet speed, and of course you always want to push a 1080 high quality HD stream, but if you arrive on site and realize, oh, hey, I don't have the upload speed, I don't have the bandwidth to push that high quality of a stream, you have manual controls where you can, control the resolution that you're sending out. You can control the bit rate that you're sending out. So typically, as long as you have some stability with the internet line and you don't have a bunch of, random things happening where someone decides they're going to connect and upload a movie to the internet, you can control your output to match whatever kind of internet connection you have. And typically we'll recommend having at least twice as much upload bandwidth as what you plan on sending out from your encoder. So if you're planning on sending out a 2 megabit stream, we'll typically want to make sure you have at least 4 megabits of upload speed to send that stream out, have some headroom to make sure that, you have fluctuations. Anytime you're sending a stream out, it's never a fixed number. It's constantly fluctuating based on how much data there is, if there's a lot of movement in your imagery, all that kind of stuff. So, but you can kind of tailor what you're doing to fit what you have available to you.
All right. I think we're going to leave it at that, Thomas. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate our online audience. Like I said, we will have this video out resident on the same page. We'll just have it edited so that we don't have so much of that graphic at the beginning. Anything else, Thomas?
I did have just something to elaborate on one of the previous questions. I won't take too long here, but someone had asked about audience interaction, and I've had a lot of experience doing various things with audience interaction that go beyond just the chat. So just to throw out some ideas for you, Twitter is a great way to incorporate interaction. So I've worked on events for brands where they'll create a specific hashtag that's related just to the live stream. And when you get into more sophisticated systems, you can actually use the Twitter API to pull tweets right into your webcast. So you guys see we're doing lower thirds and stuff like that. You can have people tweet to a particular hashtag and have that display right on the screen. If you have hosts, you can have hosts who are monitoring the hashtags and talking and interacting with it. And then also, maybe some of you have seen, if you go to an event, you'll have live polling. So that's something, there are a bunch of different platforms where you can do live polling on a mobile device where you put a question up on the screen to kind of poll the audience and see what people think about a particular topic. So that's another great way to incorporate audience interaction, where you can incorporate one of these live polling platforms into your plans, and then you can display those graphics right in your live stream, and they update in real time. And so if you have talking points around questions that you're asking the audience, you can use that and, have that be a way to have great audience interaction as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I completely forgot to mention that. You don't have to be on Facebook, but you can integrate those things just as part of your broadcast. So when somebody makes a comment, you actually see it all in real time. The online audience sees it. You could even have a monitor that shows what's going on too on your live feed, so that the people who are watching can see everything that's going on, and they can see the online participants as well. So it is fun to bring your online and your event audience together. I think that's a great point. I'm so glad you brought it up. It's not difficult to do. There are programs within Wirecast that allow us to be able to do that. And then I think the other thing to mention is, like, when we would go to a Falcons game, right? You would use those hashtags just like you talked about, and people would send in pictures of themselves. So I think that's a great way to be able to do it. You can have the event monitors and things like that. So those pictures of those people who are at home can also join you. So there's so many different things. I think somebody asked something about bringing in Zoom. And so I did have a client, we did have a live stream where they wanted to bring in Zoom and have people ask questions on the phone with Zoom. We ended up being able to incorporate Zoom, But I love, do you have experience with that? Do you want to talk at all about like being able to incorporate Zoom? I know they wanted us to go out live on Zoom, and
Yeah.
it just wasn't a platform made for that.
Yeah, I mean, Zoom is easy to integrate. I mean, just the way that we're doing this Skype integration, for example, we're not doing anything fancy with the network or virtual sources or anything. We're actually we have a Skype computer set up near the video switcher, and we've just plugged the laptop right into the video switcher as a video source, and it's just capturing a screen share. So you can always just do that, set up a laptop that's dedicated for Zoom and just capture the screen and roll that right into your broadcast. And then depending on how you need the interaction to work, if there's someone that needs to be in front of the computer talking to the person, you can build workflows around any of that. I'm not sure that any of the switchers have Zoom integration built in where you can just pull it right in as a source, but it's possible. All of these switchers, especially the software switchers, they are constantly adding features and building out new integrations and all that. So if it doesn't exist yet, it may exist in the future. And if it doesn't, there is always a way to do it. So it can be done.
Right. So we use Skype to bring people in. I think this particular client wanted to go live, as an output, like we use YouTube to go out live. And I didn't see a way to do that. Do you know if that's possible? I know you can do it with certain webinar programs, like On24 is great for, we can incorporate all of this just into the Zoom, into the On24 window. But
Yeah.
can you broadcast out onto Zoom? Because I didn't know how.
Absolutely. Similarly to just like what I'm doing here, I mentioned I have my Red camera plugged in to my computer. So I just have a very simple, I think it's a $200 little box made by Blackmagic Design. It's called the Blackmagic Mini Recorder. So you can look that up. But what it does is takes the SDI feed from my camera and converts it to Thunderbolt so I can plug it into my laptop. And then Skype actually recognizes that Blackmagic device as a camera source. So in my camera preferences, I can just switch from my webcam to the Blackmagic Mini monitor. And I'm sure Zoom has similar integrations where you can choose different devices. And there's, this particular one is a Thunderbolt device, but you can get devices for USB 3.0, for USB-C, for Thunderbolt, maybe. For Thunderbolt, for FireWire, maybe if you're still rocking a FireWire computer. There's all kinds of solutions, and it's definitely not difficult because Donna, as you know, your computer that's running the stream can just output an SDI or an HDMI feed, so you can easily incorporate that into Zoom.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're going to leave it at that. Megan, or do we have any more questions? Okay. And I don't see any more on my email. So we thank all of you for joining us today, and we're going to leave it at that. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks a lot.
We'll see you next time.